Moo. Canadian Cow Gaming. Hello, fellow Death Knights, or soon to be Death Knights. My name is Canadian Cow, and this is my 5 top tips on how to improve your gameplay as a Blood Death Knight. I'm doing this video mostly because there's a lot of really nice quality of life changes to Blood Death Knight, and I've got a feeling that there's going to be a lot of new Blood Death Knights running around in the Shadowlands, and figured why not make a quick video for people who are currently playing or trying to pick up the spec. So just to let you know who I am, I'm Canadian Cow, and I started playing Blood Death Knight probably within the first few months of 8.3. I got tired of playing as a ranged DPS, and I basically spent most of BFA trying to figure out what class I wanted to play and what specs I liked and enjoyed. And I landed on Death Knight, and so far I've been enjoying it ever since. Right now I'm rated 3,400 on Raider.io, which puts me 11th on Illidan in the US, and just over 600 world. I think last time I checked I was 611 world. But before that, when I first started playing Blood Decay, I was having a really tough time doing like 13s, 14s, and 15s. And then once I got those down, I was having a really hard time doing like 17s and 18s. And I was not sure exactly what I was doing wrong. I kind of went through and figured out a bunch of things in my gameplay that where I was doing incorrectly and things that I could improve on. And so here's the list that I have created for you guys of what I found that helped me the most. Here are my 5 best Blood Death Knight tips and tricks. Hope you enjoy. Tip number 5. Don't cap resources. As a Blood DK, you have 2 resources, runes and runic power. You use your runes to generate runic power, and you use runic power to death strike, which keeps you alive. Capping on either resource is wasteful, and you could be using those resources to do damage instead of sitting on them. The only exception to this rule is when you are knowingly capping on resources in order to survive an upcoming mechanic, where you will use death strike 2 or 3 times and then quickly regen runic power again using heart strike. An example for this, currently in BFA, would be surviving King Dazar's blade combo in King's Rest. He does, if you don't know this mechanic, he does 4 hits that increase damage with each hit. And so around hit 3 and hit 4, he's hitting pretty hard. And at a level of 21, 22, he's hitting for about 70% of your health on his last hit. So you want to make sure that you have your enough runic power saved up to survive that section, as well as enough runes in order to heart strike yourself back up to max runic power. Tip number 4. Using Death and Decay without a proc. This rule is probably the most flexible one of all the 5 that I'll be covering in this video, but essentially you just don't want to use Death and Decay unless you have a proc. This mainly applies to raiding, but and slightly to Mythic Plus. It's just good practice to make sure that you don't waste runes by using a Death and Decay without a proc. The only exception for this rule is really in Mythic Plus, where you drop Death and Decay in order to use AoE Heart Strike, or make your Heart Strike do AoE damage. Other than that, you don't want to cast it unless you have the free proc. Tip number 3. Set up some really nice macros. Having a list of macros or a set of macros that just make your life way easier. So I use a good number of macros that I find very useful and I use fairly frequently. So the list of macros that I use are a set and clear focus macro, a focus interrupt macro, a focus grip macro, a mouse over mouse grip, a mouse over raid marker, pull timer macros, Death and Decay at your feet macro, mouse over chains of ice, and focus target chains of ice. It does seem like a lot that you're adding in there, because basically for each of these you're adding an extra button. that you can press, but you've got to think about it in this way. If you have to go off of your target, select your interrupt target, interrupt, and then go back to your main target, that's a total of 3 button clicks that you're using, whereas realistically you could just use one if you have set up a focus interrupt macro on that. And it just makes things like, especially for Mythic Plus, it makes Mythic Plus way easier because you use an auto marking add-on, you auto mark your targets that you want to have marked, and you go, I'm gonna interrupt Skull, or I'm gonna interrupt X, and then someone else in your group will have square, someone else will have circle, and the main focus target might be X on that fight or on that pull, and it just makes life way easier. You don't have to worry about looking around too much, especially if you set up your interrupt cast bars nicely. Tip number 2. Only use Marrow Rend when below 7 stacks of Bone Shield. This was probably one of the bigger things I had to do in order to improve my gameplay as a Blood Death Knight. And you see it all the time in the Blood Death Knight Discord. People going, why am I dying? Why can't I survive these mechanics? I'm always runic power starved. If that's one of your biggest questions, I don't have enough runic power to do death strikes, you're probably using Marrow Rend too often. A lot of new Death Knights will tend to use Marrow Rend in order to maintain 10 stacks of Bone Shield, which this is not what you want to do. The biggest reason why you use Marrow Rend is to maintain above 5 stacks, so that way you get Ossuary. Ossuary right now is a talent, but it's going to be baked in Shadowlands, and it is the main reason why you use Marrow Rend. When you have 5 or more stacks of Bone Shield, you actually get a haste buff, which then will increase your rune generation because you have more haste. And more importantly, and this is the reason why you want to maintain the stacks, is actually so that way you have an increase on your runic power gap. You want to maintain the 5 stacks so that we have an increase in your runic power cap. This allows you to actually cast more death strikes. And overall, with the haste generation, with the cap increase, you now have the ability to cast 3 to 4 death strikes in a fairly short period of time. Tip number 1. Don't spam death strike. This is by far the most important rule. Just don't. Under any circumstance, you do not spam death strike. Blood DKs use death strike to regen our health. That is our form of mitigation. We basically become a healer. We are a semi-healer, or almost we can heal ourselves. And the way death strike works is whatever damage you take within 5 seconds, you heal a percentage of it back with a death strike. So get comfortable with not being at 100% health, like ever, unless you're not tanking anything. You want to make sure that you always have at least 2 to 3 death strikes worth of runic power whenever you're about to get hit by something. So whereas a warrior will use shield block or shield wall, a brewmaster will use their brews, you have demon spikes, paladins use their block, death knights just get hit in the face and then heal it right back again. And so if you are not making sure you always have runic power to use death strikes while you are actively tanking, you are going to die. That's just the way it goes. Yes, you can use death strikes when you are capped on runic power and you know nothing is coming up. Sure, you can death strike just to drop that runic power down, and so that way you're not capping on it and wasting resources when you use your heart strikes, when you're just doing your damage rotation. But for like something like Mythic Plus, yeah, don't spam it. Just let yourself get chunked. Just let yourself get chunked, and then you'll bring it right back up. One of the worst things that you can do as a Blood Death Knight is worry about the minor healing. So say you have a dot that's ticking on you for like 5% of your health a tick. You don't need to Death Strike that. The healer's hots will heal you just fine. Save Death Strike for the big hits, for the big damage, and you will be a lot happier with that. You'll give your healers a heart attack, but that's okay. That's your job. Your job as a Death Knight is to terrify your healers every time you go into a dungeon or go into a raid. Yeah, don't spam it. Please, for the love of God. For the love of God, don't spam Death Strike. And that is the list. So that was my top 5 tips that helped me get better as a Blood Death Knight player. I hope that they help you as a Blood Death Knight player get better and really get to see how enjoyable the spec is to play. Yeah, I love it. It's probably my favorite spec outside of being an actual raid progression healer. Now, if you would like to come and chat with me, if you have any questions on how to play Blood DK, feel free to ask me in the comments below. I'll try to respond as quickly as I can to your questions based upon what you're asking. But if you also have a lot of questions, feel free to pop into my stream. I stream most nights starting around 7:30 Pacific. I'm going to be streaming a lot more WoW once pre-patch and Shadowlands comes out. Right now, I'm not doing too much of that. But feel free to come into the chat and ask me about how to play Blood Death Knight. I will gladly answer your questions. Or if you want to just have some of my macros, I will gladly give you my macros. I don't really care. They're super helpful, and if you don't have a good set of macros, come in and ask. You can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Canadiancow. You can also find me on Twitter at the Canadiancow. And if you have any, once again, if you like this video and found it helpful at all, please like and subscribe. I'm going to be trying to put out content fairly regularly, but I'm not going to hold my breath. I have a real life to attend to. Anyways, thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Hoped it was helpful for you. Peace.